Hey, welcome to my shop. My name's Lucy and I love to build things. Today I'm going to show you how I made this giant shoe carousel. So I started by ripping my plywood sheets into approximately 24-inch by 24-inch squares, and I just did this with a track saw. You can use any method to accomplish this because these cuts don't have to be perfect. These are all going to become circles anyway. And then I found the center point by just marking from each corner, and again, this doesn't even have to be perfect. Next, you just want to drill a hole in the center, hopefully a hole that corresponds with the center point that you're going to use at a circle cutting jig. Circle cutting jigs can be as simple or as complex as you want to make them. My jig I made long before I was making videos, so I'll show you a couple pictures of how it works. But really anything with just a center point with the correct distance away that you want is going to work just fine. This is the underside of my jig, so I just use some simple T-track that fits into the miter slot on my bandsaw. And so here's it at top, and you can see that little pivot point is simply a nail that I ground off, and that knob underneath goes up to a bolt into that T-track so I can loosen it and move that however far away from the blade I want it to be. You want the hole to be a pretty tight fit, and so it can be a little bit challenging to get it lined up on that pin. And I found by putting my light on top of it, then I could see exactly where that hole is, and it made it a lot easier. Also notice that the workpiece is at a slight angle right now, and the whole jig is back a little way. So this is going to allow me to be able to push this forward in to start my cut until I hit my stop block on my jig, and then make my circle. Then just repeat this process for as many different layers as you need for your carousel, pretty much until you've made a gigantic mess of your shop. So next I'm going to mark my board out into thirds, and since my little protractor is kind of rounded at the end, I use the pieces of wood to extend it just so I can make sure that I'm right at that center hole. There's probably an easier way to do this, and so if you happen to know one, please let me know. So then I just extended the lines all the way to the end, and then I'm going to mark them over the edge so that I'll be able to keep using the same reference point for all of the boards in a row. So then once I have a mark to the edge of the next boards, then I'm able to just take that mark to that center hole and easily get my thirds marked out. Now, because I'm going to stagger these on the other side of each board, I want the thirds to be marked out exactly opposite. So I can take that same mark on the edge, and again, I'm going to line that up to my center hole, but instead of marking on the side closest to me, now I'm going to mark on the side furthest away from me, and then that's going to give me my thirds exactly split from the other side. Now before I go to the router table to give these a nice round over, I'm going to hit them with the sander just to make sure that I have a really smooth surface. And I use that cheap little plastic Lazy Susan for pretty much everything, so I'll put a link in the description for one of those. I used one of the scrap pieces from the offcuts from the bandsaw to make sure that I had a perfect round over. I had the bit set at the perfect height. Then I rounded over the tops and bottoms of all 11 pieces. And then, of course, more sanding, because every project requires more sanding. For the divider pieces, I ripped the plywood down at 6.5 inches and then cut it to about 11.5 inches. Now you'll notice that this plywood is warped. That is pretty much all that is available right now. Materials are expensive and not very good, unfortunately. I hope that in a few years from now, if you're watching this video, you don't know what I'm talking about because prices are great and material quality is high again, but right now we're still in that pandemic slump. I gave the front edges of the divider a nice round over as well because these are the kind of finishing touches that just make a project look so much nicer. Now at this point, I wasn't really sure exactly the best way to put these together, so I decided to make a series of just, one shelf at a time and then connect those one by one. So I can use that little plastic Lazy Susan, and then I'm just going to apply glue along each of the lines that I have marked out and then do my best to line up the top with it, assuring that everything stays square and that I will use the level on the side to make sure that I don't start drifting over to one side or the other with each layer. Once I was pleased with the placement, I decided to add some brad nails, and it was pretty easy to line up where I needed to shoot the nails in because I was able to put my straight edge up with the line that I had drawn for the other side. and then I knew that I would be in alignment. And then you just want to run the nails in perpendicular because they're more likely to bend side to side than they are forward to back. So this way I didn't have any nails blow up. Next, I clamped this down for good measure, but with the nails, it probably wouldn't have even needed it. You can just flip it over and add nails in to the other direction the same way. On the next layer, I decided to try adding a piece of 1/8 inch metal that I had, and then building out around that and dropping the top piece in over the top of that, thinking that that would help keep things in alignment better, but I still had to do work with the level, and I don't think that it actually was much of an advantage. So at this point, I let these dry overnight. So next I'm going to pretty much repeat the same process, except for it's going to be a little bit more challenging to get any nails in there. I'm just going to kind of get one in on the edges, and that's quite frankly fine, because with the clamp power, the glue is going to be what's doing the work anyway. These layers were definitely a little bit more tricky, and it did take a lot more work to make sure that I had everything square and in alignment. I had seriously considered making some kind of perfect third template and actually routering in dados. And if I had routed dados into the top of each of these, this would have made assembly a lot easier. But it was definitely going to take some work to get that perfect template. I think if you had a CNC to do these circles as well as router in dados for this, it would actually be a very simple assembly. I bought a heavy-duty 300-pound capacity Lazy Susan off of Amazon, and I'll include a link in the description here. And it just took me 2 attempts to get this perfect. You want to make sure that this is absolutely perfectly centered on the base so that it doesn't have, any wobble. And so the first time I thought I had a pretty good circle, and I thought that I had it pretty well centered, and it was just off a little bit. So I'm applying this to the very base piece first, and you'll see how this is going to work. So I'm marking off spots for the holes, and then you're going to see I'm going to be marking out a really big hole. And when I remove this, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. And that's actually going to be a through hole. So it's a big mounting hole that when you apply it to the bottom of your carousel, you're able to attach this to that piece. And then this is all going to sit on the floor, so you're never going to see those big holes anyway. So the big 3 through holes are going to be drilled out at 3/4 of an inch, and you'll notice that I have a piece of scrap wood underneath so that I'm not actually going to be drilling into my bench. And we're going to go ahead and drill this all the way out, or until my battery stops midway. Grab a new battery and finish what you're doing. So now you want to line this up with those big holes so that when you go from the other side, you're actually able to get through there, and then go ahead and mount the small holes with the screws. Fortunately, I was thinking ahead, and I decided to mount this while this was still only about half of its height, so I wasn't flipping it upside down. I'm often not always perfectly logical in my steps, so I was pretty proud of myself for this. So now you can see where those huge through holes come in. So I'm able to drop the screw in and attach this to the other part. So there, as you spin it around, you're going to be able to keep getting to the next screw hole. Now, I found it handy to have a little magnet nearby because a couple of times I actually just dropped the screw in, and so I had to be able to retrieve it. Now, it isn't terrible, but if you watch the bottom 2 pieces, notice a little bit of drift between them. So I decided that I was not perfectly centered, so I did take the base off, and this time I drew a ton of circles. I took apart my little Incra marking tool, and I put that 1/8 inch piece of metal that I had into the hole so that it was going to be a really tight circle, and I marked a ton of circles with a mechanical pencil so that I was assured that I was finding the exact center spot. And then I repeated the exact same mounting process. And then this time I was very satisfied with how this is turning. Then I pretty much continued the same process. This time I decided to, once I got the 3 pieces of dividers in, to actually clamp a board above it and let the bottom part set up a little bit before I put the top part on, because as this was getting kind of bigger and now I have, a base that moves a little bit more, I wanted to make sure that I was doing a good job of keeping everything square and all of the edges level. I will say that every level became exponentially more stressful than the level before. I personally would probably only want to build one that was about 6 layers tall in the future. At this point, I found that the squeeze clamps were actually working better than my Big Bessie clamps. They were just much easier to manage and get in there and not have the weight of one pulling on it while you were trying to get the other one set up. So I'm about 5'8", and I'm actually standing behind this turning it right now. So you can get just kind of an idea of how big this is. And then of course, here is me standing next to it, turning it as well. I applied sealant to all of the seams before painting this so that it would have a really nice finished look. And then I pretty much spent the next 4 years of my life painting this. Okay, maybe it wasn't actually 4 years, but it sure felt like it. There are so many edges and parts to this beast. This carousel was part of a huge closet project with a main closet as well as the child's closet being renovated. So I'll have a couple other videos showing some of the components of this build, and I hope that you enjoy and I hope that you follow along.